FOG Andrew here from the Family of Gamers. Welcome, Wargamers, to an exciting, awesome episode. This is a very exciting video for me to do because I am doing a how to play the Worms board game. Now, this is the collector's edition that I got with backing the Kickstarter. I pledged the Armageddon pledge for the Kickstarter, but the stuff that I'll be showing in this video is pretty much going to be stuff that can only be found in like the retail edition of the Worms board games, just so you don't get confused with certain things and whatnot. So if you didn't back the Kickstarter or you didn't get the full Armageddon pledge, you won't be too confused. But yeah, pretty much going over the Worms board game, my most anticipated, or at least one of my most anticipated board games of 2024, and I love the game a lot. We did a battle report on it. If you want to check that out, you can also see how the game plays there, but I'm going to be doing a very detailed how to play. So without further ado, guys, let's get to it. So before we even set up the game, we got to kind of see who's going to go first. Now, this is going to change later, and I'll explain that. We can flip a coin by using the danger flipper that comes in the box. And yeah, just flip it or fight to the death, or if however you want to figure out who goes first, they go first. To start officially setting up the game, you're going to place the win dial in the center of the table, and then each player, starting with the player who's going first, will place a map tile. They can pick randomly or however you want to do it into the center of the board, either touching the win dial or touching another player's tile here. Next, each player is going to take one reference card of their choosing color, 4 base rings of that chosen color, 4 worm miniatures, and the weapons and whatnot that they are holding do not matter for gameplay wise, and 1 oil drum, 1 supply crate, and 1 mine piece. Each player will take the base ring and stick it at the bottom of each of their worms' base, starting with the first player placing a thing one at a time in each hex, or whichever hex they want to. It doesn't really matter, and they can put their oil drum, supply crate, or their worms in whichever hex they want, as long as they do not occupy 3 full things in 1 hex. So the board might look like this when you're done. Like I said before, we're doing a game with 2 players here. You also, when you place your things down, make sure, like I said, you do not occupy more than 3 different things in a hex at a time. After that, we're going to take each of the players' reference cards, shuffle them up randomly together, and then each player will get handed their reference card. So if you put your worms in a very good spot, let's say the blue player put their worms in a very good spot with some supply crates and whatnot, but then it turns out they get the yellow reference card, well, guess what? Now you're playing as the yellow team, and now you don't get those supply crates, or you can get them later, but still, you might not play as the team that you place down. Each player then takes 4 of the same starter weapon cards for their starting hand. The starter weapon cards are the ones with the black back there. Each person's starting hand comes with a bazooka, Uzi, ninja rope, and a girder. Then, after that, shuffle the rest of the starter weapon cards together, and then give 1 extra randomly to each player. So each player is going to start with a starting hand of 5 cards. It's time to create the rest of the decks. This deck here with the white back is the supply crate, weapon deck, whatever you want to call it. You're just going to shuffle that together and keep that to the side of the board for the players. Then it's time to create the drop deck, which has this back. You're going to shuffle all of the drop cards together, and then you're going to take 2 per player plus an additional 2. So in this case, there's going to be 6. You're going to shuffle those together, and then you're going to take the sudden death cards here. which have this back. You're going to shuffle these together and then choose one randomly. Keep that at the bottom, and then the drop cards you're going to place on top of the sudden death card. The last two things for setup is you're going to take a look at the player cards, and whoever has the lowest number in the corner will be the first player, and then you're going to roll the dice to see what the starting direction of the wind is going to be. In this case, it'll be 6. Then once you get all of your mines, oil drums, and supply crates, your tokens for craters and fire, dice, water tokens, tiles, and whatnot, and target token, and all the decks together by the board, you're ready to start playing. Now, what even is the point or goal of Worms, the board game? Well, whoever, in this case, for a 2-player game, is the one to destroy the other team fully wins the game. You're doing this by moving around the board, playing cards from your hand, resolving drop cards, stuff like that. Now, before we actually get started here, I just want to clarify one thing, and that is worms, mines, oil drums, supply crates, craters, and even fire are considered a thing. That is what they're classified as in the game, a thing. You can only have a maximum of 3 things in a hex at a time, and I'll explain later what happens when you exceed more than 3 things. Alright, so now on a player's turn, there are 8 steps that need to be resolved, starting with activating a worm. Activating a worm essentially means that you're going to pick a worm to go for this turn. The second step on a player's turn is to heal a damaged worm. So let's say this worm here was damaged, you can stand up the worm at the beginning of your turn. Whenever a worm is damaged, that's when you put it onto its side. If it takes another damage while it is already damaged, it is dead. So essentially, when you activate a worm, you're also healing a worm. The third thing to do on your turn is to inch or jump, well, if you want. So if you want to inch or jump, let's say I activate this worm, I will inch him forward into the adjacent hex. But jumping is a bit different, and it's a little dangerous. Let's say I'm activating this worm and I want him to jump to here. Well, I can move 2 spaces for a jump, but then I'm going to have to roll to see where I scatter. So you'll roll the dice and essentially resolve whatever the symbol is. So for example, this is a direct hit, meaning I will land there. This means I go in the direction of the wind, which in this case would be a 6. So I will land here. But if I get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, I will land in that direction. So if I got a 2, I would be landing in the water, and that worm will be out. Now, what happens when there are more than 3 things in a hex? Well, if this worm wants to move into this hex, well, there's 4 things in the hex. There is an oil drum, and then 2 other worms in the hex. Now, I can move there, but since this worm is the activating worm, that worm gets to knockback scatter another worm. So a knockback scatter is basically rolling the dice, and then whatever the result is, that's where you push the worm. So now that would mean I would push this worm into the 6, which would actually take out the worm. Now, a knockback scatter is the same thing pretty much as a normal scatter, like when you jump, except a direct hit means that you get to push them wherever you want. This is called prodding. Now that's what happens when there are more than 3 things in a hex. But what happens if you move into a space with a supply crate, a mine, or an oil drum? Well, when you move into a space with an oil drum, nothing immediately happens, so you don't have to worry about that. But a mine is a little differently. Let's say this worm goes into this space here. Well, you will remove the mine, and then you will flip the danger flipper here. So if you get this side, that means that the mine was a dud, and if you get this side, well, that means that the mine will explode. Let's say this worm moved into that hex and the mine did explode. Well, that means you have to blast the hex by placing a crater in that hex. If there was a supply crate or an oil drum or even another mine, those things would blow up or get destroyed. So the supply crate would get destroyed. Then you will damage the worm and then roll a dice to see where the worm scatters. So let's say a 6 in that case would land the worm there. Now, if an oil drum blows up, Well, that's a little differently. You're going to move the oil drum out of the space because, well, it's going to blow up. But again, it doesn't do anything when you move into the hex, only when it's damaged. So let's say it's damaged. You will then get rid of the oil drum and roll 5 dice, and each number or symbol that you got there, you will be placing fire tokens there. So we would get 1 there. There is a result for a 6 and a 4 and a 1, which that wouldn't do anything because that would be in the water. And then there is a number for a 2, which would put fire there. Now, if I got 2 direct hits, you actually don't place another fire there, you just ignore that result. There cannot be duplicate results for fire when you resolve an oil drum. Now, don't worry, supply crates are an actual good thing in this game. If you move a worm into a space with a supply crate, you take out the supply crate and you draw a card from the supply deck, which will reveal some kind of weapon. Now, what's step 4 of a turn in this game? Well, that would be to inch or jump again. So on your turn, you can choose to inch or jump once, twice, or no times at all. Whatever you want to do. After step 4 comes, well, step 5, which was playing a weapon card from your hand. There are 2 types of weapon cards in the game. You have your standard weapons, which have this orange stuff at the top, and your super weapons, which are yellow at the top. Super weapons don't really do anything too much else mechanically. They're just really good weapons. When you play a weapon card, there are these symbols, and what you do is you resolve them from left to right. And there can be multiple different symbols on the cards. Like I said, you just resolve them left to right. If you see this symbol, you can inch or jump your worm as a part of the weapon card. And as you can see, for the Uzi card, that can get resolved twice. So that'll mean you'll get 2 free moves just by playing the Uzi. If you see this symbol here, that means you could actually play another weapon card from your hand. So you can really pull off some dangerous combos in the game. And if you see this symbol on the card, that means you resolve everything at the bottom of the card from the top to the bottom. Just to get you guys an idea of keywords and how weapon cards work, we're going to resolve some stuff right now. For example, the bazooka here, the first thing you do on your turn is resolve the actual card itself. So let's say we have this bazooka worm. He is going to target this hex here to hit that worm, meaning that you place the target token into that space. Now the bazooka card targets a direct hex, meaning that it has to be in the directions of the wind. So for example, like this worm would not be able to hit him because it is not in a direction of the wind. So going like that, or like that, you can kind of use the wind dial there as reference. After you figure out where you want to target, you continue on next. For example, here we have accuracy 4, meaning you roll 4 dice. And out of the 4 results that you get, you pick 1 to resolve. Let's say I got this result here. A direct hit would, well, mean a direct hit, and I would hit that hex. But if I go in the direction of the wind, it would be here. So you put the target token there, and it wouldn't do anything, and that would be a complete miss. A 3 would actually go back in the direction and hit yourself. And a 2 would also be in the water. So I think it's safe to say this player's gonna choose a direct hit. After rolling the accuracy, now it's time to resolve the next part, which is blasting the hex. When you blast a hex, you place a crater in that space and damage the worm. Pretty much like doing a mine, and then you scatter the worm as well. So let's say it would be a 3. You would throw the worm there, but you shot the worm that's there with a bazooka. It blasted this worm into this hex. Now there's a mine there. That mine would then go off and blast that hex. So there's a lot of craziness that could happen with the weapon cards. Now, craters are interesting because if there are 3 craters in one hex at a time, again, they count as a thing towards the limit of stuff or things in a hex. If there are ever 3 craters in a hex at a time, well, that's not good, because then you take a water hex and you place it in that spot, and if a worm lands in there, well, guess what? It's gone. Next up is the Uzi. So this is target direct hex within 2. Well, unfortunately, this worm and this worm wouldn't be able to target this one. They could really only target the one that's in their own hex. But let's say they wanted to hit this worm. Well, luckily enough, the Uzi card has an inch or jump symbol as the first one, so they can inch or jump there, and then we can resolve the card, which in Uzi, all it does is damages the thing in that hex. Let's say that worm was already damaged, well then you would take it out of the game. And then it has another move, inch or jump symbol, and then it could inch or jump again. Alright, well, it looks like this worm here is surrounded by mines. Well, what should he do? Well, you can actually play a girder card, which would let this worm target their own or adjacent hex and remove a mine, fire, an oil drum, or a crater from that hex. So this worm really wants to get that supply crate, so he'll play the girder to remove that mine. Then the worm can inch there and then play another card, which, let's say the worm plays the Uzi, can move there, pick up the supply crate for another weapon, and then target a direct hex from within 2 and then damage a worm. And then, if they really wanted to, could move again from the Uzi. Alright, so it looks like this worm is pretty stuck here, and this island's starting to flood, but he wants to get over to this one here. So, he can play the Ninja Rope, which is an accuracy of 4, and he can roll those dice, and look at that, got a target, the meaning that the next thing would be place the active worm in the target hex, which will land the worm there. Now, it is an accuracy of 4, and I only rolled 3 dice. Well, why is that? So I just want to clarify that whenever you have to roll an accuracy test, for each hex that is not adjacent to you, you're rolling 1 less dice to a minimum of 1. So shooting stuff or throwing your ninja rope from far away can be kind of risky, and you might not get exactly what you want. Also, this says target hex instead of a direct hex, meaning that the worm can pretty much target anywhere. It doesn't have to be a direct hex. The last thing about weapon cards I want to mention is an airstrike. For example, the airstrike card says target airstrike. Well, what does that mean? Well, you take the target token and you, flip it over, and as you can see, there is an arrow. So let's say this worm is going to activate. He will target this hex and place the target token in a direction for the arrow to point into, and that target token will show, in effect, the 3 hexes in that line, including that target token hex. So the airstrike card here says also to scatter the target token, meaning if you were to roll the dice, you would move the airstrike token here, and then that would mean that it would now target this hex and this hex there. The way that the airstrike is facing, no matter where it scatters, does not change. So if it scattered here, here, or here, it would still target in the 3 hexes in that direction. If there was a direct hit, it says blast each hex. So then this hex, and this hex would each get blasted. Alright, so after you have played a weapon card, it is time to start the end of your turn, which will start with step 6, which is, to end your turn. So if you have an end of turn ability from a card, you can resolve that right now. But then step 7 is to draw a drop card. So you would drop the top card of this deck and resolve it. So for example, here, this is the oil drum card. This says place a supply crate in the emptiest hex. So what does the emptiest hex mean? That pretty much means any hex that has nothing in it. So that would be this hex there. But let's say there was a worm in there. Then you would go to the next emptiest hex, which is just choosing a hex that has 1 thing in it. And if everything has 1 thing in it, then you would go to the next thing that has 2 things in it. And then, you can't have more than 3 things in a hex. But let's just say, for example, you place that supply crate in the emptiest hex. And the next thing is to place an oil drum in the same hex, so then you would do that. And then it says remove 3 fire from the map. So if there was fire on the board, this would be the time to remove those fire tokens. And then you will change the wind direction by rolling the dice and then changing the arrow. If you got this symbol or the wind symbol, then the wind would just stay the same, but for this case it would be rolling a 3 would change it to 3. Just another quick example, the supply card here for the drop card. It says place a supply crate in the emptiest hex, which would definitely be that one, but it doesn't say to place a supply crate in the same hex. It says to place it in the emptiest hex. So then, after placing this one, you choose the next emptiest hex, which would be one hex that only has one thing in it. So that could be this one, there's a crater there, so let's say we put that there, and then same thing, we change the wind direction. And if there is a tie for what is the emptiest hex, then the players whose turn it is will choose. Now for this 2-player game, there are 2 drop cards per each player, plus an additional 2, meaning that there are 6 drop cards. And remember we put that sudden death card at the bottom? Well, once the drop cards are empty, and there's no more in the deck, you just have the sudden death card left. At the end of a turn, when you were to draw from the deck, and it's the sudden death card, you flip it over, and now that card stays in play for the rest of the game. And at the end of everybody's turn, you resolve the drop thing here, which is place a water hex on the hex with the most craters. So let's say that would be this one, so you would get rid of everything there, and you would place a water hex there, and then place a supply crate in the emptiest hex, let's say there, and then we change the wind direction, which would be rolling the dice, and then it would stay the same. There are a bunch of different sudden death cards, as well as a bunch of different drop cards, but everything is pretty self-explanatory. Just go from the top of the card to the bottom, and yeah, resolve everything on there. Sudden death cards are cool, though, because they all have unique things on them. For example, the Flood, which will flood the board. WMD, everybody basically can get super weapons. Armageddon destroys the board. More items, supply crates, stuff like that. If you're playing with 2 players like this, whoever loses all of their worms is the loser, and the other player will win. If you're playing with 3 or more players, after 1 player is eliminated, then the players go for 1 more round, and whoever has the most worms left wins. There are also a lot of other tokens in the game, so if you're playing with 3 or 4 players, at the start of the game, instead of just placing 2 tiles here, the board's pretty small, so you're basically placing 1 tile per player, and if you so choose, you can play on the space side instead of this grassy land area. So if we're playing with 3 players, we can add another tile like that, or if we're doing 4 players, we can add another tile on the board and make a pretty big sprawling board. And the drop cards also, if you're playing with 3 players, then you would add 2 drop cards per player, so 6, plus another 2, meaning 8. Or if you're playing with 4 players, you would do 2 of each player, which would be 8 cards, plus an additional 2, which would be 10. And then same thing though, there is always 1 sudden death card at the bottom of the deck. Now there are additional rules for utility cards and 5 to 6 players and some optional alternate rules, which I may do another video on. If you guys want, let me know down in the comments below. But that pretty much is Worms, the board game. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed my how to play Worms, the board game video. If you have any questions and you need me to clarify some stuff, let me know down in the comments below. I did my best to kind of try to go over everything, but there might be some things in there that might get a little confusing, so just pop a comment down below, or you can even join the Discord, which is linked below at our link tree. You can check that out and ask questions there as well. But thank you guys for watching. Let me know if this was helpful for you guys. Maybe I'll do more how to play different board game videos in the future. I just love Worms so much. I love this board game a lot. Let me know what you think about Worms down in the comments below. And let me know if you want an additional video talking about how to play with 5 to 6 players, playing with utility cards, and the additional optional rules at the back of the rulebook. Let me know all of that stuff in the comments below. There are videos on the screen that you can check out, like the Worms gameplay video that me and Ryan did. So if you want to see Worms the board game in action, check that video out. It was a really fun time, really good game. But yeah, guys, appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.